myself. Here we go. Okay,
We're
recording in
back.
progress. Seamless, seamless. I think the AI translator left and took the recording with them. Okay, so we're back. So we want to sort of shine a light on some of the pressure points that excellence in parental support can help achieve, can help mitigate. So I'm delighted that Jasmine and I are able to put this event on. I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to come along today. And there will be an opportunity at the end for some Q&A. Okay, Jasmine, you're first.
Certainly. So nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. So my name's Jasmine Kelland and I work at the University of Plymouth as an associate professor. And my research is particularly looking at parents in work and some of the challenges that parents face. And also that some of those challenges are quite different and quite different in nature. So I'll be going through some of my research in this area with you today and hopefully provide you with some useful information that can help you sort of rethink a little bit about maybe the way you look at parents in work and also think information to take back to your teams of how to improve how we manage parents in work.
In terms of your parenting journey, Jasmine, where are you in your parenting journey?
Okay, that's useful to have it share, isn't it? So I have three daughters. They are 16, 18, and 21. So still all live at home. And very much my research was sort of started by my own experience with my family and some of the challenges we've had as two parents who've worked full time, mostly the whole time, really, and some of the challenges that we've encountered. So that was very much underpinning my interest in this area and why I continue to be interested and continue to note. I think myself and Ian were just talking about the lack of progress in this space. So continue to be very passionate about it.
In terms of some of my background, I was twice a stay-at-home dad when Freya was born in 2010. There was no there was no shared parental leave. I had a couple of weeks of statutory paternity leave. I actually thought I'd been underpaid. That was how clueless I was to the structures around sort of parental support. So that was a little bit of a shock to be to open your pay packet or get actually the pay packet I think came separately, but certainly to look at my bank balance and go, hang on, there's not enough money here. And that was probably the first of sort of many examples of where sometimes expectations of what good practice looks like maybe lags behind what often we hope to experience as parents. My daughter Freya, she's 15 now. Struan is 12. I was twice a stay-at-home dad, looked after Freya for 9 months sort of on my own, Monday to Friday. And then she went into nursery. So I had very much that experience. My wife's a lawyer. She's a partner in a law firm in London. And very much the way we've organised stuff is perhaps the flip side of kind of those traditional roles. Whereas I've very much been the supportive parent in terms of the lead carer in many ways. I'm very much the lead taxi driver, certainly Monday to Friday, and so that's a big part of what I do. And then Inspiring Dads is a coaching organisation, and also workshops and events like this to talk about why working with dads and why supporting new dads is a route to gender equality, which is a really important a passion for both of us. So thank you all for being here today. Stop in the chat. Where you are on your parenthood journey and what you're looking to get out of this little session today. It would be really interesting to see that and share some thoughts. In terms of today's content, we're going to be looking at what we consider to be the basics of parental support, what the current state of play is for contemporary parents, what's the kind of the broader societal picture, both in terms of the framework, in terms of statutory provision, but also some of the pressure points in terms of the economic situation as well. We're going to look crucially about some of the difference between how we perceive mothers and fathers at work and what that means in terms of how we can design interventions and support that work in terms of the individual needs, and those intersectionality aspects are so important to understand. There'll also be some of our top tips in terms of how to move beyond those basics. And at the end, we'll introduce to you a couple of workshops that we're going to be putting on later in the year in terms of how we can support you as HR professionals, those of you who are HR professionals, with your implementation of that excellence or moving towards excellence. Okay, so in terms of the basics, Some of these things, often I think when you look at job descriptions, you might see statute or kind of benefits packages, statutory provision masquerading as benefits. I think we've often seen that, pension contributions, stakeholder pension contributions being lauded, and actually that is a statutory provision in the UK. Obviously, different in different countries. We've just been, Faye, who's in Switzerland, has been talking about the changes in parental leave and increased parental leave provision in Switzerland, way above what we have in the UK now, which, considering that Switzerland, I think it wasn't until the 1970s that women were allowed to vote in Switzerland, shows that perhaps the UK is lagging behind in terms of changes, positive changes in the right direction. So we've got statutory maternity, paternity, and shared parental leave, supporting parents' legal right to request flexible working. I think as we have more and more tension in terms of return to work mandates, then this legal right will be tested more and more, I think. Upholding laws around preventing discrimination of parents or individuals, regardless of circumstances. Perhaps some of the basics might be childcare assistance, salary sacrifice, really important way of maximising income and being able to use childcare vouchers in particular. And then communicating those support options to employees. I think, certainly with something like shared parental leave, there's a really big challenge that people often don't know about it. They don't know whether it's possible to do. They don't know it necessarily exists as well. So actually some of the basics in terms of parental support often are about talking about the opportunities so that everyone knows what's possible. There's lots of different support out there. For instance, parental leave, which can often be confused with other policies, is a statutory policy where parents up to the age where the children up to the age of 18 years can take, I think it's 18 weeks of leave, unpaid leave over the course of those 18 years, spread out at any time, take it at any time over that course, but it's not very well known. But it is a statutory right, and for those people who use it, really, really handy around summer holidays, frequently from the experience that I've seen.
Over to me. So I think we can all kind of acknowledge really that the world for parents has changed quite a lot. If you think about over the last kind of 60, 70 years, we've seen quite a lot of change in sort of norms for how parents manage. If you think about the sort of working arrangements, it seems as if the sort of typical sort of more traditional bred female homemaker and part-time and male breadwinner is a declining social norm, and the stats certainly support that. We know that the most common working arrangement for UK working parents is both parents working full-time, for example, and that's data from the ONS that tells us that nearly sort of 74% of households have both parents in work. Again, a real shift away from this breadwinner homemaker norm that was the norm for so long in the UK. And so these changes require both mums and dads to navigate work and home spheres simultaneously and to run those alongside their family. And that can be quite difficult to do. And we'll talk about some of those challenges today. So the real sort of how we expect fathers to behave is quite different, and it's changed significantly. And I think this is probably best illustrated almost through the images, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen there. And these are the men in my family, and I think it kind of helps us to see how things have changed so much with what we expect good dads to do and how we expect dads to behave. On the left there in the black and white picture is my grandfather, Roger Spry. So when he had his young family, he had three children. He worked very long hours. He never put those children to bed. He was never home in time. He came home way after they'd gone to bed. He wasn't in the delivery room. He never did a school run. He never went to parents' evenings. And weekends were taken up with him playing rugby, and he'd go to his club. Now, we all loved Granddad and Dad. We thought he was an excellent father and a grandfather. He was very well respected and considered to be a good dad and grandfather. Now, of his time, that's what everybody did at his time. So you fast forward to sort of 20, 25 years on, and there you'll see in the middle is a picture of me as a baby with my parents. So when I was born, the societal expectation for dads had shifted again. My father was more involved. Was involved in the nappy changing. He was involved in bedtime stories. He was very much an involved father, but he didn't change his work patterns. He still was at work. He didn't do school runs, and looking after us was very much my mother's domain. He was a good dad. He was involved, but it remained her domain. It wasn't something that he would be involved in, liaising with the school, all that kind of thing. So if we move fast forward a little bit to the picture there is my husband with my youngest daughter. Gosh, she was so cute. When she was born, and so we felt very quite strongly that we'd moved, time had changed, and the society had changed. So we were really kind of going into this very much that we would both be actively involved in the children. We would share as much as we can the load between work and home, and that would be something that we would do very jointly. But that wasn't as easy as we thought. There were more challenges involved because whilst there has been a real societal change in the expectation of fathers, regrettably, there's still so many stereotypical gender norms which are guiding the workplace, which makes it a little bit more complicated.
And thank you for sharing the pictures as well, Jasmine. Okay, so why do we need excellence? The British Chamber of Commerce points out to those COVID skills shortages, and organisations face 62% of organisations facing skills shortage. So we need as many people in the workplace as possible in order to plug many of those gaps in many ways. Retention. I think a lot of families face those dual income balance challenges. As you know, Jasmine's the stats from the ONS there in terms of 74% of 74% of families and both parents are working and trying to balance what is increasingly a complex sort of societal pressures, workplace pressures, expectations, activities for children as they, at some stage, I guess I'll come out the other side of it, but very much at the moment, my children probably do too much sport. And I didn't think I'd ever say that, but that's one of the, so thinking about how do we balance this? How do individual families balance this and make the support work for them. Recruitment being really, really important. Competition for skilled candidates remains strong according to the CIPD in 2024. I think we're certainly seeing that the number of vacancies in the UK is actually coming down, which is a good sign for the economy more generally. But also it puts pressure on those businesses who are looking to recruit. And one of the ways that we can recruit and retain individuals and improve engagement, which remains stubbornly low according to Gallup. Around about 10% of UK workers are engaged by their measures, engaged in their jobs, and that's quite challenging for productivity as well. It's also challenging for closing the gender pay gap with 7% on average for the Office of National Statistics data, and we'll come on to that a little bit on that in a minute. But around these elements around excellence, we also have the tension between return to office mandates and how do we support parents who are often pulled in different directions, but in terms of sort of organisation of their family lives, but also being in two places at once and long commutes, and perhaps post COVID, where people have moved further away from jobs. Certainly, those individuals, like many of us here today, who are fortunate enough to be largely office based and being able to work more remotely, actually creating excellence in how we support parents and how we understand, I think, as well about how parents are pulled in different directions, caring responsibilities for an older generation as well. So there's sort of plenty of tension there between between office return to work as well. Okay, in terms of equality and diversity in parenthood, I think it's one of the things that Jasmine touched on. We'll talk more in a minute. Whereas we would, I think in an ideal world, we want to treat parents equally. Actually, it's really important to understand the starting point for mothers and for fathers and the pressures, societal pressures, and also the practical pressures that surround parenthood from a gender perspective, because actually it's challenging to create a one size fits all model, and actually that's often quite inappropriate for individuals and just doesn't really work. Certainly from my perspective as a coach, almost every I can't remember the last time I coached a mum in terms of a new mum, but I coach a lot of new dads, and so there is a different way of doing things. There are different pressures ultimately. So we're going to have a little look at what good mothers in the workplace looks like, motherhood penalties. What does good fatherhood look like? And Jasmine's going to talk about her fatherhood forfeit research as well.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I think it's really interesting in this sort of age where we're trying to be more equal and we accept that mums and dads are working the same hours, that we still have such different expectations of mothers and fathers, and particularly in work and how good mothers behave and how good fathers behave in the workplace. As a result of this, I think mums and dads both face challenges, and that's something that I wanted to make kind of really clear today, is I do think both mothers and fathers face challenges, but the nature of them is quite different. So in order order to manage them effectively, understanding the nature of them and the different pressures is quite important, I think. So one of the things that's an ongoing challenge for mothers is that in order to be believed to be a good mother and perceived as a good mother in society, the expectation is that you'll have the main responsibility for children. And what's interesting is that is regardless of the working hours that the mother themselves might do or the working hours of their partner or what happens in their household. So even in households where the mother might work full time and the father might be a stay-at-home dad or might work part-time, the expectation is that they still have the main responsibility. And I'm sure the mums on the call who are working mums will echo this. That quite often, certainly in my household, I will 9 times out of 10, I will get the calls from the school, regardless of the fact that my husband works at home. It's much easier for him to be able to go to the school. We've said it quite frequently. However, it's always me that gets the call, and then I need to call Chris, who's at home and also on the call sheet, and ask him to go. And so, and you often find that that is the expectation of in society, is that the mother is called first and has the main responsibility. That's often, it's been called in research the motherhood mandate, which sort of dictates that if to be considered to be a good mother, you need to be physically present and therefore available to meet your child's every need. And that actually that should become before your career, and that you should be willing as a mum to forego that career in favour of your children and for your parenthood, and that you're expected as a mum to prioritise children above your working commitments. So as a working mum, there is still the expectation that your children will always come first, and that any deviation from that will be considered to be not quite the norm. There's some interesting research that's been done around female breadwinners with regards to household tasks. It's not just about what happens with regards to children. It also this gender expectation also goes into household tasks. And there's research that's been found that actually women who are breadwinners still do the majority of the household tasks, and very different from men who are breadwinners who don't necessarily do all the household tasks. And this is often linked to earlier research, which has found that we expect mothers are judged by the cleanliness of their homes, so women are judged by that. And that if their house is a mess, people will be judging, thinking, "Oh God, my house is a mess." People will be saying, "What God, Jazz's house is a mess," rather than Jazz and Chris live in that house, so we both work full time. So both of us are responsible for the house being a mess.
Hang on, did I move the slide?
Did you foxed yourself?
Obviously didn't move that slide. Hang on. No, we're talking about motherhood penalties. I've got it. We changed it at the last minute, so
My
apologies
fault
for
now.
that. So in terms of motherhood penalties, this is something that was highlighted the charity Pregnant and Screwed a couple of years ago. Certainly talking about this challenge around how positive motherhood can also be seen as a challenge in the workplace. So women, working mothers, have been seen as being disliked as women, disproved over non-working mothers, less likely to be promoted regardless of qualification and performance. This idea that that our kind of our assumptions about what it means to be a good mother play out across all aspects of our lives, and how that can be quite damaging for equality within relationships and equality within the workplace. Assumed to be less committed. At the same time, we assume men are more committed. And this becomes a challenge when we go outside of these norms, as Jasmine will talk about in terms of the fatherhood forfeit. Um, if you what it means to be a good mother, what it means to be a good father, can make it very difficult to do something different and be perceived in a particularly sort of negative way. We also have challenges around childcare costs. Childcare costs are high, never seem to go down. Fortunately, I'm a little bit insulated from that now in terms of the age of our children. But they never, that is a particular pressure point on families. However, more frequently how those costs are framed is in terms of mother's income. So can mum return to work after a period of parental leave, or are those costs not, they don't balance out? If the costs are higher than her income, then she shouldn't, a sort of economic argument would say she shouldn't return to work. However, that sort of ignores the nature of, for majority of families, that family dynamic where childcare costs should be seen as a shared investment in return to work. But often, certainly the narrative and something I saw today on LinkedIn. Certainly another article at the weekend that talked about how mums couldn't return to work because of the cost of childcare, and we're removing that sense of fatherhood and shared responsibilities from it. And then the third bit of some COVID research that Jasmine pointed out to me was really, really interesting. We talk about first shift being what we do at work. Second shift is the activities we do when we're at home. And women and mothers were much more likely to start work again later in the evening than men were, with all other things being equal, and starting a third shift of activity, which flows nicely into that element of household tasks. Equality at home is often the driver of a lot of equality in the workplace. Second shift being the domestic activity, the scene labour. And on the other side, there's a little slide from a French cartoonist called Emma talking about the mental load and the things that we carry around in our minds, the organisational tasks that we might take on. I certainly have a to-do list, an app, and to manage all this. I try not to hold it in my head. The mental load can be quite challenging, but the mental load is often invisible labour. It's often the project management within households, and that can be quite challenging for gender equality. And in terms of the gender pay gap, starts in our 20s, according to 2021 data. It's a little bit probably out of date these days, but I think the narrative will be very similar. Is that actually we see increasing, a lot of the gender pay gap is actually drawn firstly from assumptions around motherhood and commitment and fatherhood and commitment, but also the number that men are much more likely to work full time than women are. Certainly those numbers start coming through into the 30s, 40s and 50s. Okay, so we're going to talk about good fathers at work.
So thinking about what we said about mothers, when we see fathers at work and conceptualize them as being good fathers, it's a little bit different, as you would expect us to say, with good father being linked to financial contribution to the household. And actually, fathers are viewed a little bit differently. So when you're working with fathers, they are largely seen as professionals without caring responsibilities. So they're that sort of ideal worker, which doesn't have any responsibilities, and therefore are conceptualized a little bit differently than a mother would be. Fathers are expected to prioritise work, and then naturally with families coming second, and that's something that is acceptable to people. That's not something that's outrageous, and someone wouldn't think you're a bad dad if you do that. That's something that is culturally acceptable in the workplace. When it comes to actually sort of the fatherhood's experience, and when fathers are trying to get jobs, research has found that fathers will get a premium in the labour market. So fathers will actually be given a little bit more salary when at the point of recruitment, because they are considered to be actually more needing to provide for a family, and therefore bumped up the salary scale more so than non-fathers and more so than women. Closely kind of linked to that, particularly looking at fathers compared to non-fathers, fathers have been found in research to receive fatherhood benefits. So they're believed to be more competent and more fit and warm, and more likely to get promotion than non-fathers, and to be more dedicated and more committed than non-fathers, which is very different from where mothers are concerned. When mothers are interviewed, these aren't the same assumptions that people think because you're a mother, you're going to be more committed, you're going to be more settled and focused on your jobs. That's directly opposite, which is quite interesting, I think, to explore. We can move to the next slide. So this kind of takes sort of right into sort of my specific research. And I was really interested in fathers who go against this sort of stereotypical norm of being a breadwinner father. So fathers who were actively involved in childcare, for example, or caregiving dads. And there was some research that sort of underpinned my research, was done in America, and particularly found that these fathers faced quite a lot of negative consequences when they moved away from stereotypical norms. And I was quite keen to explore what that would look like in a UK context. So I looked at working parents, I looked at mums and dads, and also spoke to managers about their experiences and asked them to do some sort of exploration with me about how they viewed fathers in that environment, how they viewed caregiving fathers. And I've actually felt that they sort of faced a forfeit, and effectively that they forfeited a positive work experience due to actually being an actively caregiving dad and talking about that and being open about that. For some dads, that meant working part-time. For some dads, that meant working full-time but needing to go and do school runs, that sort of thing. So there's 4 elements of the fatherhood forfeits. The first one that I found was that fathers are less likely to obtain a role that allows them to find to combine care and work, such as part-time employment or flexible working. And because they were less likely to actually obtain the role in the first place. So they were automatically almost forced into this full-time role because they were less likely to obtain a role that enabled them to combine the two. The second element of my research found that caregiving fathers are always considered as secondary parents because we automatically assume that the mother and the child relationship is primary. And how that manifests is when they're trying to get support in work, when they need to go because their child's sick, they're always put in this secondary position. And the expectation is always that the mother can, and that they would only go to pick their child up from school if the mother couldn't go, for example. If we can move to the next one.
Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing and then come back. It's gone off in a weird,
Gone in a weird zone.
gone in a weird Zoom place where I guess.
Lovely, thank you. So closely aligned to that was the two other elements of the fatherhood forfeit, which was that fathers are less likely to obtain workplace support for caregiving than mothers. Mothers are always going to be given priority. And for some of the dads that I've spoken to over the years in this research and follow-up research, sometimes it was the dad who was the primary caregiver. The dad worked part-time, the mum worked full-time, but they still felt that they were less likely to get support for all the things that come up in everyday family life, which require you to leave work for a period and go and sort something out. I also found that fathers face quite a lot of social mistreatment when they want to be actively involved in caregiving, which included sort of facing mockery, being considered that they were in some way lazy and that's why they were doing it, and they're a little bit work shy, that they felt excluded, that they faced a lot of negative judgment and were generally viewed with suspicion. I followed up this study just after COVID because I was really hopeful and excited that things would have changed during COVID and that fatherhood forfeits would have no longer been prevalent. Unfortunately, I was sorely disappointed. I did find that there'd been an increase in flexibility that dads were able to get, which was great. And also found that dads were voting with their feet. Dads who weren't able to find the flexibility that they'd got used to during COVID were leaving. And therefore, this puts this issue right at the centre of businesses and becomes quite a strategic business issue, which I think is probably quite good for the cause. It's good for people who, such as myself, who are making this argument. However, I did find still some of the forfeits that I'd found previously, this idea of exclusion, this idea of being viewed suspiciously, treated negatively, and put in a secondary position that continued post-COVID that hadn't been changed by COVID. The other forfeit that I found that emerged in my follow-up study was that actually fathers get disproportionate praise for their involvement in caregiving. And I think this is quite interesting because when you think about praise, I always think of praise as something that's quite positive. If you praise your children, that seems to be quite positive. But the dads in the experiment very much felt that the praise was not something that was positive. Being constantly praised for looking after your children, which is exactly the same as your partner was doing, or for some dads, they were the only person doing it. It was very, very frustrating for them to constantly have to go to school and have people tell them that they were amazing when they're just picking their child up, when on the other 2 days their wife did it, nobody said anything. And the sort of dads in the follow-up study felt this was very frustrating and made them feel quite marginalised.
I think it's fascinating sort of seeing the research, and you're talking about the research, Jasmine, in relation to my own sort of personal experiences of, and not so much for me because I was quite a cavalier carer in many ways, but certainly I met a lot of men who, with young children who weren't comfortable going into sort of female-dominated environments. Their only connection with other men or other people generally during a working week as a caregiver was actually in dads groups themselves, and it was quite sad to see. And this is going back a few years, but I think some of those patterns still certainly exist. The more men who take leave and the more men who see other men taking leave, the better we can make things, I think. Okay, so in terms of top tips for unlocking excellence, so this is a little bit of a list of things that organisations can do, which would improve things for parental support generally. So enhanced parental leave, but also equal parental leave. So regardless of how you become a parent, I think there's lots of challenges with shared parental leave in terms of complexity, and certainly where parental leave within organisations isn't equalised, then you have sort of strange circumstances with some women within single gender relationships taking paternity leave because that's the only mechanism. So equal parental leave often simplifies things for an organisation. but also it changes the narrative in terms of how parenthood is seen within that organisation. If men and women are equally as likely to take leave in the first year of parenthood, you can no longer discriminate in quite the same way against potential working mothers in the way that we maybe it would have been it's possible to do in organisations where there's a big difference between how much leave is available for parents. Phased return to work, I think, is a really important, really good way of getting people um, to be eased back into the workplace after an extended period of time. If you were out of work if you were off ill for 6 months, no one would expect you probably to come and hit the ground running on the first day of 6 months of leave. So, but frequently within organisations, that's often what we experience, what individuals experience. So on-site or subsidised childcare, and there are lots of different ways to support parents in terms of paid time off. There's probably some that we've missed here. We've got adoption, surrogacy, baby loss, neonatal, family sick leave, emergency leave. Lots of different ways to um, support parents. Frequently, not actually, we can organisations can offer these kind of benefits, but they're often, they're not. Most of the time, most people don't need those benefits, but they're there. It's a really good way of being, of recruitment and retention if they are available. Parental coaching and peer support, I think it's really, really important. I would say that as a coach, because it's literally my day job. But having certainly for parents to have a space to talk about their personal challenges. Certainly, men find that really, really beneficial. Group coaching as well, because actually for a lot of men they don't have that support network around them in quite the same way, or haven't perhaps had the permission and the support to have conversations about how to balance their work and family lives. And I think, and the last one, and certainly not the least on this list, is having well-resourced employee resource groups, whether that's parents and carers or gender equality networks, can be a really, really good way of supporting parents in a way and creating a community for those individuals to thrive and have conversations with the people around them. I think that's really, really important. For those of you who've come across this before, this is the parental leave benchmarking tool that I've developed, inspiring dads. We've got someone joining at the moment. Cool. Do use a QR code here. We've got 285 organisations, 125 plus equalised parental leave offers and share parental leave as well. And it's a database that that you can search by industry, compare by industry eligibility, length of leave, both on a personal basis, but also if you're interested in that from a perspective of benchmarking against your peer group in terms of organisational benchmark. So yeah, please do have a look at that. We'll send you a link out on the email as well. So if you haven't got time to do the QR code, have a look. So we wanted to talk about moving on. Before we get to the Q&A section, we can, Jasmine, like a little bit of time to sort of talk about some of these topics if anyone's able to stay on. Some stage in the next sort of 4 to 6 months, we'll be putting on maybe even quicker than that if there's enough demand. And we'll be putting on a couple of paid online workshops. So developing your business case for parental support excellence, because often, it's about unlocking the funds within organisations is so important. And the second one that we're planning to put on is around overcoming manager resistance, because actually for a lot of individuals, certainly men that I coach, then it's the line manager lottery and how the policies are actually implemented and how well they're supported at a line manager level can make a massive difference. We've got some QR codes on here so you can register your interest as you go along. So we're going to talk a little bit so this first one about supporting the business case. So work will help you to work through the elements needed to create your business case for investment. So the benefits, the challenges, how do we overcome those challenges? It's a workshop format and exploring the steps that other organisations have achieved through case studies as well. How to talk to your male employees as well. I think it's really, really important to understand their needs. Often it's the piece which is the hardest probably to unlock, because men often don't talk about it. Do surveys and Jasmine can probably talk more about the challenges of getting men to talk about their experiences much more than I can. But actually understanding how to connect with your men and building up a business case, really, really important, because men don't unfortunately talk about the challenges and the benefits of support as much as we would like them to do as professionals working in this place. And then finally, that hearts and minds piece. What is it that makes a difference in terms of changing people's attitudes and understanding about the need for the need for parental support excellence?
So the second session that we were going to run is going to be particularly looking at barriers. So we've talked about some of the barriers today, and particularly some of the sort of gendered nature of those barriers, but we'll be exploring those barriers in more detail to try to get managers to understand the barriers and to actually give you the tools to be able to teach your managers to be able to manage some of those barriers and manage some of the unconscious bias that often they don't even realise that they have, particularly with regards to gender stereotyping. What we're envisaging with this section is would have some sort of role play examples that you could use, some best practice that you could use, and also some actionable guidance and resources that could be used with your teams to really help your managers improve their treatment of working parents. And certainly from my research, a lot of the managers that I've spoke to over the years, they didn't intend to make their employees feel marginalised. They didn't intend not to support them. However, that was how it was received. So often looking at some of these barriers and highlighting how they exist can really help in the management of them.
Fantastic. So we've got some time for Q&A. And it's a QR code. So yeah, if you follow the QR code, it'll ask you whether you're interested in registering, and you can choose either or both of those workshops to register an interest. So we're not looking for anything more than an interest in putting those on at the moment. So Jasmine, thank you very much for sharing your research today. I think it always strikes me with the fatherhood forfeits how sort of painful in some ways it takes me back to to a time where with young children how challenging it can be to be a man in particular with caregiving responsibilities. And when we look at those caregiving responsibilities, if men are in many ways, if we want women to progress in the workplace to and fulfill their potential, we often need men to be fulfilling their potential as caregivers, and understanding that so many men do actually want to be caregivers, but that society is not necessarily set up for it. And gender
It's very
equality
much
is
about gender equality, I think, and that sort of runs both ways. Sometimes I will have comments made to me as a sort of working mum, sort of saying, how can you be supporting the dads? But I feel really strongly that it's about, if we want to have gender equality, we need to look at the mums and the dads and how to improve the experiences for both parents in work.
definitely. We can stay on for a little bit of time. If anyone's got any questions, any thoughts or observations in terms of what we shared, or any particular questions for either of us. Thank you for those of you sharing in the chat. There's certainly those challenges around what a good dad looks like, and that sense of who gets phoned when who gets phoned on that list when school or nursery. And I had it once. I was PTA secretary actually. So the office knew me really well. So I was listed first. And there was one day where Lisa got phoned. I can't remember exactly what it was for, but she got phoned. And then she phoned me and said, "School phone." I said, "Oh, they have a phone." Oh, okay, fine. So I phoned them. I went in. I said, and I made a point. I said, "Can I just check? Have you got what the data, what information you've got in terms of calling?" And I was listed first, and Lisa was listed second. And it turned out that it was someone who didn't know me. It was a temporary member of staff who had ignored the fact that I was listed first because they thought that was the right thing to do. And it was really striking how actually I had a degree of privilege of being first because people knew who I was, and therefore, oh yeah, of course it's Ian. Yeah. So yeah, really can be really painful and really just tiring, I think, for individuals in many circumstances. Has anyone got any questions? Any thoughts on what we've shared, or the implications of what we shared, I guess?
I've got a slightly ill-conceived question. I'm not sure if I've quite formulated it properly, but I was just obviously there seems to be some sort of benefits to both genders in terms of the parenting side, and obviously as the sort of gender roles become more fluid and I guess our career roles as well kind of merge, don't they? And I guess based on sort of the historical differences. I wonder how both genders can kind of hang on to the benefits that they've kind of historically had, but also kind of absorb the other benefits. Because I think there's probably some things you mentioned there about some things I hadn't thought about in terms of like the fathers getting this kind of almost kind of pay rise premium because become fathers
Yeah.
and people see that as
Mm.
a. So I guess you don't want to lose that, but
Mm.
again, I suppose I'm comparing that more to becoming a father rather than becoming a mother.
Mm.
How do you cling on to those things? Maybe becoming a mother and getting a pay rise as well. So how do those genders hang on to the things that are good for that gender without impacting negatively on the opposite gender? Um, as I said, it's a little thought out question, but I think hopefully I've made the point
I
of
think it's
how do you hang on
really
to those things without
interesting. I
diminishing the
think
things
it's a really,
first.
really good point. And just thinking about you talking then, I was thinking actually, if you have been, say, for example, if you're a mum and you're applying for a role, there's all those benefits about sort of being more likely to be more reliable and not move and be really dedicated. They're all true for a working mum as a
Yeah.
dad. They really are. But I do think we're so far behind on this. I was thinking, would I feel free to sort of front that up, actually almost to sort of say in my covering note, I'm a mum of three girls. I've managed it for 21 years, a long time full-time work. So therefore I know I can do it. Or would I just not mention it? And honestly, for my personal view, I probably still wouldn't mention it because I still would be worried about the bias that I'd face. I don't know if anybody else on the call like has a different view, but really would love to see a world where we really acknowledge the skills that you learn, having to do all these second and third shifts and having to spend weekends organising the most complicated schedules, and just the birthday parties, trying to arrange birthday parties for so many people that you have to for these children. There's so many skills that you learn, but I think there's skills that as often we keep on the down low, and it's such a shame. But I think we're quite far from being able to really be open about that. I don't know if anyone else has a different view.
If there's the openness as well, I was thinking about as those sort of roles become more aligned, the I can that's part of the stigma as well because I don't think dads talk about being a dad quite as
No.
much, and it's
Mm.
not a big thing in the workplace.
Yeah.
Um, and there's probably a stigma around some of that as well. And actually, if you come into the
Yeah.
office exhausted because you've been doing the night feed, or
Mm.
just because you've been doing the things that historically a mother might do,
Yeah.
there's a stigma around talking about some of that as well. So I guess you kind of want to hang on to the sort of those things without, but also being able to share those things in a much more
Mm.
equal way as well.
Because one thing that often sort of comes up, I think, is when dads come back from paternity leave, whatever that might be, however long you've had. But it's very much business as usual, isn't it? It's kind of, oh, congratulations on the baby, but it's been a nightmare. Right now, you're back into work, and we don't really want you to talk about your children anymore.
No,
Whereas for
no.
women, it's very much like, oh, you've had a baby. What are you thinking about work? How are you going to manage it? And it's an ongoing conversation, which means it's more difficult, I think, for dads to say, actually, I'd quite like to work part-time as well. It doesn't really open up that discussion that it's something that's acceptable. And also, if you're both working full time or both working part time, it's the same experience. You've both been through
Absolutely,
it.
yeah.
And I never, yeah, just think that kind of idea that a dad after 2 weeks paternity leave, if you're lucky, then goes back to business as usual, just always seems to be surprising to me.
Yeah, I know a lot of dads that never get asked about how they are either in that scenario. It's always like,
Yeah.
how's mum, how's baby?
How are you? And it
No,
can be awful, it can be really traumatic as
yeah,
well.
they're fine. I'm on my knees, but they're fine.
Yeah, I'm dying here. Yeah, definitely recognize that.
I'm not saying it's all difficult for dads, by the way.
It's difficult for everyone, let's be honest. It's difficult for everyone.
Just sharing the QR code again, and then we'll email out the link for registering interest in the workshops. I think it's I think it's a really interesting point, Neil, because it there are obviously there are privileges, and it's that sense of going beyond them. I think we're a long way from men losing some of their privileges around how they're perceived in the workplace, and I think actually in many ways we need men to experience some of the pressure points in terms of taking leave that women experience in order for men to kind of go, hang on, this we need to change this. Actually, sadly, I think the reality is in a lot of in a lot of parts of sort of society, sometimes you know when a challenge becomes something that men face as well, it's more likely to get something that's going to be done about it. I think, which is a sad reality, and I think it's uncomfortable to sort of say it. And I do speak, when I coach men, I do speak to men who are like, well, I don't want to take leave. I don't want to be treated like a woman, actually. And then men are aware of, some of that privilege, and it can be difficult to navigate. We need as many men to be cavalier about it, don't we, Jasmine, in terms of
Definitely.
getting ahead. But we need to put them on the pedestal who do things and do take leave, because then they unlock that sense of it being okay. Is that something that comes up in the research?
Sorry, I was just messaging the chat then. I
Brilliant.
was just thinking of really interesting.
That sense of male leadership role models, men who
Oh my goodness, yes,
parent out
completely.
loud,
That's one of the
being really
main
important.
differences in organizations that really manage as well, is when senior leaders are sort of saying, I'm a dad, I talk about it. And rather than kind of pretending they've got a meeting at 3 o'clock, they put in their diary, I'm going to pick my children up and I'll come back and do 2 hours later on, and being completely open. And you see it can be absolutely transformative, because people will see that actually the senior people in their organization are saying, it's okay, we know you're a dad. Being a dad's great, and they're quite open about that, and that has a real massive impact. So I think that's one of the things that certainly I've got a book on this, and one of the things that I recommend is that managers really role model what they're doing, and if they're open about it, it encourages their staff to be open about it. Because I think it's if they don't, men can feel actually they need to keep up this pretense that their family doesn't exist, which of course isn't the case. And certainly, as we know, with modern families, it's very unlikely that you've got a dad who isn't involved in the day-to-day childcare, because it's much more likely that both parents are working full time.
Alana, in the post, I read a post. It wasn't one of mine, but thank you. Managing partner of a law firm would make a conscious effort to ask employees how their families were, to encourage colleagues to acknowledge that we have lives outside of work. I think it's that challenge. Women are expected to work like they don't have caregiving responsibilities, and men are, they're also constrained. I think
Mm.
actually it's that sense that I remember during COVID. It's that sense of a man who had children come into a video call was seen very differently, in a much more positive way, in terms of humanizing perhaps that
Mm.
individual, and women who had the same experience with children coming in, almost that they weren't in control of their family unit.
Yeah, it
And
was
so that
judged
narrative,
differently. Certainly,
yeah,
the research
very.
that I did during COVID found that it was judged differently, unfairly, completely unfairly.
You do, and ultimately you do need men, I think, men in leadership roles, and men who are doing things that positive behaviors, to be eulogized in a way that perhaps we wouldn't do for motherhood, sadly, I
Mm.
think. But it is important, I think, to have men on a pedestal, almost fatherhood on a pedestal, almost.
Mm. And just parenthood more generally, just to be more open rather than kind of be negative about it. Just be like, well, what did you do, and how great and how wonderful it is. And whilst there's all logistical challenges, it's a gift and it's a wonderful thing to have. So to not be able to mention that in work, where you often spend a good deal of your week, is important change, I think.
Anyone else have any questions or observations? Anyone want to share something or ask a question for either of us, really?
Hi. If there's time, we might take the opportunity. Me and I've got two colleagues here. We're actually master students at the Royal College of Art, and we specialize in service design, so designing
Okay.
services. Yeah, and we are specifically focused on kind of the barriers to shared parental leave. The policy has not been a success on a policy level, but we're thinking about this need to start having these conversations quite early on, and that there's a lack of tools for parents to kind of start talking about shared parental leave and how they're going to split it, at the stage. And organizations, obviously, you're talking a bit about the complexity of shared parental leave, and that actually it's there's a lot of problems there just in the complexity of the policy, and organizations actually being able to support parents in it. And also that there's lack of awareness, there's not much support from HR teams for parents who want to do it. As Amanda, has been your perception as well, and there seems to be a lack of tools for parents to make the help make the
People
decision.
don't, and with shared parental leave particularly, people don't really understand it often.
Exactly.
And again, often that's questions that are in the workplace are directed at the mother, kind of what are your plans? Whereas
That
the
was my
actual
experience. I'm a mother as well. I've got a 3-year-old. Yeah, we didn't take it. I didn't even know it was. I didn't even know it was a
that
statutory
was the thing.
right.
Yeah.
I thought I would be, and looking back, and how did we not know?
Yeah, how did you know that? Yeah. But if no one's asking those questions, and we know from the research that those questions don't often get to ask to dads about what are you thinking when the baby's born. If you think about a male employee announces that they're having a baby, it's very rare that their employer will say, "Oh, what are your thoughts about managing work and care afterwards?" That's not a question that certainly I very rarely come across. It's questions directed at mothers. So straight away there's expectation. If you're a working mother, you think, oh, then there might be potential for me to change my hours. But a working father straight away is getting that message that isn't going to be part of your working life. I don't know if you've had any different experiences, Ian, of those questions being asked.
Yeah, one of the challenges is that there isn't a equivalent for the MAP B1. So the starting process, the starting of the sort of the statutory framework around pregnancy, there isn't an equivalent form for dads to have. To the extent that, depending on what leave individual organizations are offering, is that the numbers of new dads in their organization might go completely under the radar. And a really interesting conversation, it was quite a few years ago now, it was ExxonMobil. I did a couple of events down at ExxonMobil for a big refinery down near Southampton. And because they were offering 2 weeks of fully paid paternity leave, it was entirely possible the HR person kind of on reflection thought, I might not know who's actually become a dad, because they might just take their 2 weeks, they get paid at the same rate, they might just go and come back without us really knowing, outside of an immediate, sort of centrally outside of an immediate department. So you haven't got those triggers. And I think even for those men and families who are clued up on shared parental leave, it does take a degree of bravery to say to an organization, I'm gonna take some of my partner's leave that I'm not necessarily entitled to myself. I'm going to take leave, I'm going to opt into this leave, and I'm going to signal ultimately to my organization that taking the leave away from my female partner, which is often which is the most common sort of circumstance, is something I want to do. And actually, as someone who coaches dads, I see dads who have already gone through that process. They've been brave about it. They've worked out the process. What we don't see, the men that we really want to catch, I think, from a societal sort of improvement in society, we want to catch those families at the very early stage when the options can be put in front of them. Do they understand what the leave options are? How are they going to navigate this? How are they going to have these discussions with their line managers? Because actually, for a lot of men who might say, actually, I want to take shared parental leave, and there's a really good policy here, if they start a conversation informally with a line manager, say, well, we're not expecting you to do that. No one does this. That can really kill that conversation really, really early on. Which I why I think that line manager piece is so important, because we just don't see those men who are lost in the system because shared parental leave is complicated, but also the signals that it provides to an individual's workplace in terms of what commitment looks like. And I think that's what commitment and in terms of what being a good dad looks like, and those breadwinning responsibilities and that narrative. It can be really hard to break out and take on something like shared parental leave, which there are 30, 35, 40, coming up to around about 40 organizations on our database who are equalizing shared parental leave with maternity leave. So there are good companies out there doing things, but you can have great policies, but sometimes men can be put off by it.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a little bit long. I shared parental leave. One thing, there is on shared parental leave, there's one thing I think which is really, really important about shared parental leave that it does unlock. It unlock because it's quite hard for in a heterosexual relationship for mum and dad to be off at the same time with shared parental leave. It does create an opportunity for men to take on sole childcare responsibility for their children. So you can't overlap leave a lot of, there are lots of couples, perhaps, if they're taking extended periods of leave, they're taking them at the same time. And so dad doesn't necessarily gain the skills and confidence about looking after young children, the connections, whereas shared parental leave, that is, from my perspective, I think that's possibly the only good thing about shared parental leave is it does generate, well, there are other things, but in particular, it does generate the opportunity for improved equality, improved confidence in terms of childcare and responsibilities, which a lot of men don't actually get to have that opportunity, sadly.
Yeah, it's a very different experience when you're on your own than when you're a team of two. It's yeah, you see it as it's definitely a different experience. Thank you for that. That's very useful.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts? Oh, Javid in the chat, what advice would you give to dads and conversation with line managers when they have to work from home to do the school runs, therefore can't do the required days whilst hybrid working in the office, especially if mother may be ill or not present, so cannot share this responsibility? I think with all these conversations, it's been open and honest about the pressures and the challenges, in the same way we would do parenting or maybe older relatives. I think it's easy to assume that in our own personal circumstances, other people aren't facing the same kind of challenges or different challenges within their own sphere of what's going on. So I think being open and honest and coming with an idea of what you need and a sense of confidence. I mean, most organisations, it's a confidence. Will the work get done that needs to get done? Is the client still happy if you've got clients? So I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I can just add there as well is kind of almost come with solutions. So if, for example, if you wanted to change your working hours a little bit to enable you to have more time at home, if you can kind of think of what the business benefit might be for that, and it might be that you have some overseas customers, for example, it means that you'll be available longer for those overseas customers, but trying to almost think of a sort of business case before you even ask, I always think is a good idea. Because with any sort of UK law, and I know we've got a lawyer on the call, any UK law is going to require you to be reasonable and to evaluate how reasonable you've been and apply the test of reasonableness. So I think the stronger that you make your argument that there's actually quite a good business reason and the business won't be impacted and how you're going to mitigate that, it makes the company look more unreasonable if they don't allow some flexibility. We know that some companies won't, and some companies don't want to be supportive and are prepared to take the risk that you will leave and sort of vote with your feet, as I talked about before. However, we'd like to hope wherever possible, if you can try and make a real clear case of how this could be better for you, but also better for the business, then when you're looking at reasonableness, you're going to come across as being pretty reasonable about the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Yeah, it's often about the solution to business case. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you for staying and sharing your thoughts and observations and questions. I hope it's been really interesting to learn about the research and hopefully connecting the research into elements around sort of motherhood penalty and fatherhood forfeit and how they can inform that move beyond the basics and then into parental excellence, because there are lots of opportunity for supporting parents in different ways. Some will be more challenging to implement within organisations than others, but there are certainly lots of things out there, and we look forward to sort of future conversations with as many of you as possible in terms of facilitating that thought process and unlocking the excellence, because it's as you'll have noticed, it's something that we're both very passionate about, and obviously, and in terms of those of you who have been able to make the live, then thank you very much for your contributions as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.